Ah. All right. Hello, Facebook world. It's me again, Harrison. Welcome to Next to the Floor. I am joined again this week by the incomparable, the indefatigable, the ever incredible Bjorn Anselm. Thanks for joining us again here.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, man.
So,
Again.
yeah, welcome back to Next to the Floor. We're wicked excited to have you again join us here on the couch as we talk about, all things dance and Black and, etc. Yeah. Before we dive into today's topic, which I but I stated last week, we were going to talk a little bit about the 13th Amendment and, the school to prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex, blah, 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 all sorts of crazy stuff like that. I wanted to talk about two other things that have been really, really bothering me this last week. It's been driving me up the wall, Bjorn. So
to share.
Let's see. Well, because there are two things. So one, this one hasn't been driving me up the wall. But first and foremost, for those of our viewers who are at home watching, if this is your first time viewing, welcome. Thanks for joining us on Next to the Floor. Our whole goal and purpose for this, our podcast, the reason why we're here and existing is to, bring to light some of the, thoughts and ideas and lift the voices of Black dancers around the industry, from the ballroom world to everything else. I know we're starting small, and local, but
that's how it all starts.
That's how it all happens. But we've got some big things planned for the future, so stay tuned for that. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's been really grinding my gears this last really grinded, was, oh God, where was it? I think it was in Chicago or outside of Chicago. The kid Cannon that was murdered.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly sad and incredibly unfortunate that happened. And my heart and soul goes out to his family. And, I, for one, wish them peace and, anything that you could wish to a grieving family. I know it's a very difficult and trying thing for them, but the issue that bothers me around this particular situation is how it's been politicized to effectively discredit the Black Lives Matter movement, to discredit everything that we as a people have been fighting for, because you see this, these conservative memes happen all the time on Facebook, where it's like, oh, this person was murdered by so-and-so, and where's the media outrage, and where are the protests, and where's all of this stuff? And it's very frustrating, because one, it conflates the two ideas that this particular situation, and then the countless other situations like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, et cetera, are one and the same.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do the victims of any of these crimes any justice or any favors either, because all it does is politicize their untimely passing. So in this instance, why I get frustrated, the call for justice for Cannon, I think that's a very fair and valid call. Like, I think his family should and does deserve justice. But my issue that I have is that what justice are we calling for? Like, what justice are our conservative talking heads that are out there? What kind of justice are they talking for? Because if we're talking about legal justice, within 24 hours of this 5-year-old's murder, his murderer was apprehended after a statewide manhunt, and he was charged with first-degree manslaughter and will most likely be serving a maximum sentence. Right. So, like, in that sense of the word, like, justice was absolutely served in that sense. And I know for a lot of our viewers, this might be, a controversial opinion, but that's the fact that, like, in this situation, one, his murderer was a civilian. He wasn't a police officer or a law enforcement official, right, who was on the job.
Right.
And then similarly, right after it happened, justice was dispensed and taken care of. And so if you are truly looking for justice for this kid, we have to look at what were the root causes that enabled it to happen. If you want justice for Cannon, why aren't we or our conservative talking heads or fellow people who are sharing memes like this, why aren't we calling for stricter gun control laws? Why aren't we advocating for more funding for mental health services and things like that would prevent situations like this from even happening? Why aren't we funding, educational programs to prevent unnecessary crime due to lack of education and poverty in inner city settings and blah, 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 blah. So why aren't we fighting and pushing for those things when we know full well that those are the root causes, rather than using this as an opportunity to, like, distract and try to discredit a movement that is actually calling and fighting for those exact situations?
Right. I think, honestly, too, like you said, with this situation, it's not, at least from the criminals' perspective, it's not a police situation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they end up arresting the guy, so they're involved. But I almost feel like most people will look at life like the right thing just happens. Like, you don't necessarily, like, when you're a kid, your parents just kind of police your whole life, and it's like, okay, it is what it is. When you're wrong, somebody polices it, and then it's right at some point again. And then when people grow older, they kind of get stuck in that same mentality when it's like, oh yeah, the government will fix it. Oh yeah, the police will, fix everything. And then when one of these other situations happens, for the longest time, it was like denied and discredited. And with the advent of camera phones and 4G and things like that, it's like you can't ignore it now. So then it's almost like how in ballroom we kind of we teach so that there's not this problem later down the line. Right. So you're like, oh crap, where did this, people see one of these videos and it's like, how did we get here? And nobody has any idea, because you're not ever, like, actively trying to make sure things are done properly. You just kind of wait till there's a problem.
And that right there, I think, is the larger issue, is that, well, and this is where I think fundamentally I don't want to, draw ire from people, but I'm going to say a controversial yet brave statement. That, that is where I think we've failed as a society, in that we have had, for years upon years upon years, sociologists, anthropologists, economists, educators, scientists, all of these people, psychologists, et cetera, saying for years that here are your issues, here are the things that are wrong.
Yeah.
Here are the root causes to those things, and here's how we fix those. And then somehow, some way, we have, as a society, and I say this as an American society, I think society, when we talk about like the individual, like American society, it doesn't not include like global influence, but we have actively decided to make those decisions or make those kind of those statements about like, if we funded our schools more, we wouldn't have as high rates of crime, blah, blah, blah. We've turned those into political points. We've politicized humanity, right? And that's a very distressing thing. And I've said this many times, and I think I said it to you in a conversation recently, or maybe I said it to my family. I don't know. I went to go visit my family this weekend. That's a whole nother topic. But our very existence, like as Black people, my existence as a member of the LGBT community, our coworkers' existences as women, our very existence is political, and revolutionary. And that is scary to a lot of people and really kind of disrupts the status quo in a way that makes the current powers that be uncomfortable. But let's segue, because that's actually a really good moment to segue into what we were going to talk about today, which was, the 13th Amendment,
right?
School to prison pipeline, and what I think is, a way as dancers we can help combat that. Oh my God, people can see what my hair looks like today. I've been wearing a hat for the last couple hours and refusing to take this guy off. So, who doesn't love a good pork pie? It's not a fedora. I'm not one of those. It's just like a regular little pork pie cap.
Right. It's like a fedora's nephew.
Yeah, it's like a not creepy fedora. But let's talk about the 13th Amendment, which after, I think, when did 13th? I think it came out this year in January. The Netflix documentary. If I'm not mistaken, it came out early this year. I think it was it was
2020.
Yeah, before Tiger King. Before Tiger King, but after Love is Blind. It was like right in between those two things. And so that also goes to show what we as a society are, excited about.
I'm telling you.
And that's not a read of, American consumer mentality, because I totally got down with Tiger King. That was a wild ride. And I highly recommend, if you haven't.
I hadn't seen it so that I could see it for the first time yet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, I don't normally.
But sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I'm like, that is a perfect representation of where our country is. That documentary has real footage and evidence.
We are living
like
a Tiger King nightmare.
And we're late to know about this guy. So
and I feel like for some of us, some people are like totally fine with it. They're like, you know what? Half of our country is getting married to Joe Exotic right now. And the other half of the country, or a smaller chunk of the country, is that girl that got her arm bit off by the tiger and is like, well, I guess this is it now. Cool. And is just like going with the punches.
Didn't she lose both arms, or one of the guys left?
No, so she lost her. Okay, so we'll get to the 13th Amendment in 1 second, in a hot second. But
you need to watch Tiger King.
We need to get on Tiger King. So she's, and I apologize for misgendering, but he is a trans man, identifies as a man. So he lost his arm. And it was tricky because they don't actually mention anything about his identity in the movie.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think in the movie they refer to I don't know what his name is anymore at the moment, but they refer to him by his dead name.
Yeah.
The entire time. It's a completely different topic, but
yeah.
I saw an article right afterwards that was just so you guys know, Tiger King is wild, and there is a trans person in the documentary, and it is the guy loses their arm, and then there's another dude in there, this Billy Bob Thornton looking guy who has no legs.
That but still works there, because why not, right?
So it's a wild ride, and we are knee deep in a Joe Exotic,
Big Cats,
Carol Baskin, Big Cat rescue, proverbial nightmare.
Yeah,
this is America.
That's
but
America.
I think it's an appropriate segue to the 13th Amendment. If you're tuning in now, I'm glad that you just caught us ranting about
Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin.
Yeah, it's an important topic, I think. There's a comment right now. He says, I got through the first episode of Tiger King and I'm all set. You need to go through the whole ride.
You don't know what's happening till the third episode.
Oh man, and it is wild. I'm still very much convinced, as with the entire rest of America. Apparently, America can all agree on one thing, and it's not that Black Lives Matter, because that's a contentious issue.
Not yet, right? Not yet.
But everybody can agree that Carol Baskin killed her husband.
Yeah,
we can all agree. We can all agree to that. But we can't agree to the fact that Black Lives Matter. But
Yeah, but it's good to know people like that exist in the world.
Right, it keeps you humble.
Functioning.
And also, it's a nice reality check and puts things into perspective that you could be
know who's out there.
A toothless homosexual meth addict that owns a farm of big cats, is in a polyamorous relationship, has a guy that works for him with no legs, and is feeding dozens upon dozens of tigers old deli meat from Walmart out of a dumpster. So,
speaking of Walmart,
if there's not a greater allegory for the year 2020, it is Tiger King. But anyway, so the 13th Amendment. We're here.
Did you pull it up?
We made it. So the 13th Amendment, for all of our friends, family, viewers, etc., is this beautiful thing that was added to the Constitution in 1789. I want to say the year. Oh man, the internet's gonna hate me, and I apologize.
Oh my God.
1789, which was, oh man, probably just under 100 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, which basically states, here, let me read it. Section 1 of Amendment 13 is neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So basically, oh, and then the other like crazy thing about, there's another section of the 13th Amendment that's a little bit wilder, but we'll get to that later. But it says in there, like it literally just like, is written into the Constitution of the United States that, you know, slavery is legal if you are convicted of a crime, right? Like if you are convicted of a crime, they can force you to do hard labor and work.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we go around and when as you know, Black people, we go around and say that that racism and like this idea of like the root of slavery and racism is like in the fabric of our country, right? It is literally written in the Constitution of the United States.
Right, which you
right?
can't, you know, like you were saying with these amendments, the Constitution's not something that if there's a wrong part, they're gonna take it out. You have to
Right.
amend things. So
They
it's
have
like,
to amend it. I mean, like we've done it before. We amended the Constitution after, you know, for prohibition.
yeah,
They were like, oh no, alcohol's illegal. And then just kidding, here's prohibition,
Right.
right? Let's make an amendment for it. But
yeah,
it's, you know,
interesting structure.
And granted, you know, this was before slavery had ended.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not a historian, so you can't quote me on this, but I'm fairly positive truthfully, at that time, people who were convicted of crimes were either runaway slaves, you know, or like immigrants who came over, and name a decade where, you know, someone in America, the new America, was dissatisfied with a different immigrant group, whether it was the Irish, whether it was the, you know,
Right.
Italians, whether it was the Jews, whether it was like blah, 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 like
Normally monetarily associated.
right. Like we are, as a country, are quite literally built on the very concept and idea of indentured servitude.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything that this country was built on is built on the backs of slave labor, whether it was literal slaves and enslaved people, or it was people who were incarcerated and jailed and forced to do labor on chain gangs, blah, 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 break rocks,
Right.
you know, etc.
Like, what's the difference sometimes?
And so why I want to talk about this amendment so much more now, right, is because it has become so much more relevant. Because America has entered, I say has entered as though it's a new thing, but it's been a thing since probably like the 70s or 80s, where we're in this phase where we exist in effectively what is we exist with a prison industrial complex, right?
Yeah.
Where a large part of our economy, in many states' economy, I know I was bringing this up last week, but like Louisiana and Alabama, for example, the vast majority of their economy is based off of prisons, and like the money that the prison systems of those two states, like what they can create out of the prison system, that's basically what runs their economy. And it is like, it's grossly pervasive. I've got some statistics here.
Let's do it.
Okay, so, and this is all about the the school to prison pipeline, which is a large part of the prison industrial complex. Basically, like for some of our viewers who aren't familiar with what it is, that's the point of this talk, is to talk about it. So, normally I would say, Google it because it's there and available for you. But the prison industrial complex basically is this situation wherein we have allowed private companies and private businesses to open and operate jails and prisons within the continental United States. We have allowed for we have literal tax breaks and tax loopholes and things along those lines that are written into the laws of the land that allow for private prisons to basically make bank millions upon millions upon millions of dollars every single year to incarcerate people. And because of that, a lot of the states and this is a large issue, it's an issue literally everywhere, but because it has become a literal business, a lot of the state prisons aren't able to compete, which is such a weird thing, aren't able to compete with these private businesses and these private prisons. And therefore, the private prisons are able to basically lobby the Congresses of these varying states and of the federal lobby system is wild, but able to lobby the lawmakers and things like that to basically say hey, you need to give us these many prisoners or inmates each year. We need to fill these many beds or we are leaving. And because we're leaving, we're taking all of our business and we are shuttering your economy. So you have states like Louisiana and Alabama, because the prison system is the largest part of their economy, they can't afford these large for-profit prisons to leave. So they have no choice but to enact basically a second wave of Jim Crow to fill beds in these prisons that keep people incarcerated for longer, or give harsher prison sentences and blah 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 blah. So the cycle, it's a never-ending cycle. But anyway, so getting to these statistics, and this is about the school to prison pipeline, which is a major issue, and it's a thing that is very near and dear to my heart, because I, before I was a ballroom dancer, I was a high school teacher here in Boston, and I know this affects a lot of the students that I worked with, or either has or had in some way, shape, or form. So here's children and being punished, going to prison. And this is from it's called New York School Talk. It's a nonprofit that deals with, schools in New York State. But from school to prison, students of color in particular, and all of these statistics surround students of color because that's the population that is most normally affected in these situations. But students of color face, harsher discipline and are more likely to be punished out of school than their white counterparts. 40% of students expelled from U.S. schools each year are Black. 70% of students involved in in-school arrests or referred to law enforcement are Black or Latino. Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended by their white peers for similar,
crimes or offenses,
or whatever it's called when you do something bad in school.
Juvenile.
Black and Latino students are twice as likely to not graduate high school as their white counterparts. 68% of all males in state and federal prison do not have a high school diploma. There's also statistics here from the foster care system, which is its own issue, but we won't get to that just yet. But, so you look at those statistics and it's very easy to see. And, I say this after working in an inner city school, that, those statistics very much ring true, that when you look at the landscape of who is running inner city schools versus suburban schools. I grew up in upstate New York in the middle of what is unfortunately, like kind of Trump country, which is real exciting to go back home to see all of that noise. But, the school that I grew up in, there wasn't a police officer that roamed the halls. And, and if somebody did something bad, they were sent to the principal's office or went to go speak to the guidance counselor or something along those lines. And it was dealt with in an appropriate manner. And like teachers were, or parents were spoken to and blah, 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 blah. If there was ever an issue, like it wasn't handled in school by the police, like they weren't even part of the situation.
Right.
Whereas, I come to Boston and I start working at some of the schools here for BPS, and pretty much every single, and you went to school in like, you were in Boston Public Schools, right?
Right. So I went to Boston Public Schools till through fifth grade, and then I went to Brookline through high school after that.
Right. And were there police in
the Boston Public Schools? Not back then. And I think a lot of those times were like associated with when they started bringing police into the schools.
Right.
And then in Brookline, it was like Brookline was, so when my mom put me in this program called Metco, which was...
the Metco program, which was...
That's like a whole nother...
That's a whole nother thing. Yeah. That was an issue.
Like,
I will say, like, not to digress, but they still, like when I was in college studying to be a teacher, that was like, we studied the Metco program and all of its like failures. Mm-hmm. Like that was a thing. And it's still a large part of like educational curricula.
Well, like, I don't even want to get into it, but real quickly,
anyway.
I'll say like that, even in that is a numbers game, because they, and I want to parallel this to 13th we were talking about. In the Metco program, there are many times where you have kids that just don't get the help they deserve. I know my sister at one point, they were trying to have her in, I forget the classes, but they try to like section off kids that they think are not doing well for whatever reason or something. Right. And basically they try to fill those programs because each kid in it is money for the program. So it becomes a numbers game. And then, you have kids that maybe they're dyslexic or this or that, and they're not getting the attention they need. And my sister, well, I won't get into that, but that's not my story to tell.
I don't want to call her out or anything.
Right. Well, I'll say I've never been tested. I'm probably dyslexic. I'm like, personally convinced, but I've just noticed tons of my friends that went through whatever they went through and had like this generally simple problem if, the problem's addressed and maintained properly, but it turns into a worse thing because it gets ignored, and then they get put into some program where they're like, all right, I don't want to pay attention anymore, and then they become an even worse student. And then it's like we were talking about with the 13th documentary, when they start to talk about, well, I wrote part of it down. They talk about how once they ended slavery, they transitioned into what was called convict leasing, which is what we're talking about. And same deal. There was kind of like a, Black Lives Matter-esque kind of, uprising and thing. And then that breaks into the Jim Crow era. Right. Same deal. People start fighting back at some point, and then that breaks into where they tried to, I forget the tactic, but it was something to like stop people from wanting to vote or trying to vote. And then that was what broke into the civil rights movement. And then that transitioned into the mass incarceration system of today, you know, transitioned from back in the day, but now, like you said, it's private companies running the prisons, and they have state mandates where the state has to provide full facilities for them to
Right.
run.
Right.
So they're contracted through the feds, but to
Right.
say, yeah, we'll run this state's prison, but they have to fill the prison for us. So
Right.
now we're right back at that, like the Metco, where it's
Right.
like, oh yeah, well, we got to fill this up with kids, and these people are just trying to make a dollar
Right.
off people's lives.
And it becomes it like it quite literally just that vicious cycle of,
Mhm.
you know, well, you know, we get, and it's the, unfortunately, like the incentives, that incentive system is so
Yeah.
backwards. Like the state's like,
Yeah.
ooh, we get more money if we
Right.
incarcerate more people. And it makes you wonder, like, when did we get to that point? Because then in that situation, right, the whole goal of, at least, you know, in my viewpoint, right, like the goal of incarceration or imprisonment should effectively be like rehabilitation. If you're going to be if you're going to be giving people sentences, right, we have to provide them opportunities and the resources and opportunities during their incarceration to prevent them from what's the word, from becoming repeat offenders.
Hmm.
Right. So you look at, I think it's Sweden, where they are it's either Sweden or Switzerland. I mix the two up, even though they're two completely different countries, on the continent of Europe, which we talked about last week.
Right.
You know, like Africa, favorite country, Africa. But they have I think one of the lowest repeat offender rates in the entire world, because their entire prison system is structured around rehabilitation, and addressing the like socioeconomical needs of the people that are incarcerated, or even like socioeconomical, or even like the mental health
Exactly.
issues.
Like you said, what's the root
having.
of the problem, and
Right.
not just, hey, let's imprison somebody.
Right. Because while imprisoning somebody for 5-10 years might be a solution, right? It's a solution that doesn't address the core symptoms of
Right.
the problem.
It
Right.
just,
And it doesn't address the problem. I mean, it does, but it addresses it by putting a Band-Aid on it. It says, let's take this person off of the street for,
so we can't see the, you know, it's not in our
right.
face.
So we can pretend that they don't exist, only for, you know, if you're, you know, if you're Black, you know, 15 years. If you're brown, it's 10 years. If you're a white guy, it's probably 5 years. And if you're a police officer, you are, you know, getting paid leave.
Probably on the couch.
Yep. You just sit home with paid leave, but, you know, it's a out of sight, out of mind sort of thing. And then 15-10-5 vacation done, you're back out into the world, still up to the same BS.
Yeah.
Right. All of the issues that you were dealing with beforehand are still there. Right. If you were experiencing economical hardship beforehand, that is all still there, unless you're in some sort of working program in a state jail. If you are, you know, if you're part of, like, if your crime was caused because of like educational disparities and things like that within your community, and that's one of the largest causes of, like, the two largest causes of crime especially in inner cities, are access to wealth and education.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, if you're lacking in education, just like this thing said that I read a second ago, that 68% of males in state and federal prisons do not have a high school diploma.
Mm.
I don't know.
I think we lost Harrison here. Yes, he should be back in 1 second. But I think that you guys, if you can hear me, should definitely look up that documentary. It will break down that beginning thing that we were talking about, how they just kind of went from slavery into another system and another system that were just kind of like repackaging slavery into different names, but having access to still do the same thing. I'm just gonna make sure we can get this guy back. But at the end of the day, nothing has changed and you're just doing the same thing to people, but calling it something else. There we go. And then the biggest thing is, to make it worse, when you're doing that labor in the prison system, it's now cheaper labor than is provided by regular companies that are out in the world. And so now it becomes like a sweatshop situation, or even just pure slavery in some cases. Okay, I'm not sure. Oh, Harrison's computer is on life support apparently, so he'll be back with us in 1 moment. He's texting me now. Yes, so with this documentary, it comes to speaking of this company that I don't know if you guys heard about, that was started back in the 80s during, I want to say, Ronald Reagan's presidency. And it's a company called ALEC. So what happened was, at a point back then, a lot of the entertainment businesses decided to band together to sort of form this like super company, and then join with the government so that they could, as they put it, create a system that was serving society or whatever. You can look it up. The company's called ALEC, and basically just became this powerful company that was running entertainment, and then using their connection through this company with the government to push their lobbyists to get laws passed that would benefit those same companies financially and other things. So one of the things that happened was Walmart lobbied to pass this law that would allow for greater quantities of bullets to be legal for sale in the United States, and then became like immediately the largest distributor of bullets in the world. And I think they still are to this day. And then there was, I think they said in the documentary, they showed where in the Trayvon Martin case, the unfortunate case in Florida with George Zimmerman, he was like this super duper Walmart customer, and just showed all these ties he had to Walmart. And it just kind of shows you the connection that all of these, that a company like this and all of these things that we're talking about have to all of these incidents and things that have been happening for an unknown amount of time now. Fortunately, like we were saying earlier, today we have camera phones and people that are willing